Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers. And today we are so honored to have Captain Paul Watson with us. Thank you, Paul, for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's been such a gift to have you in our communities. And our first interview was after Hitman for the Kindness Club came out, your book about kind of your life story and a little bit. You can't get it all in a book because there's been so much, but just the basic general principles of where you started and how you have taken on this aggressive nonviolence. So thank you. Can you give us a little update since our last podcast a year ago? What's been happening in the waters, where you're working these days?
Well, we have two ships. Right now, I have the John Paul de Joria, which is in the United Kingdom, and we're ready to go next week to Iceland. We're just waiting on Tuesday for the Minister of Fisheries in Iceland to announce whether she's going to give permits to Christian Lofson or not. They're waiting to the last minute. But if those permits are granted, then we'll be off to Iceland to block those whaling operations. And if the permits are not granted, well, that's good news. There won't be any whaling. And we'll be concentrating our efforts on opposing the killing of dolphins and pilot whales in the Faroe Islands. But we're also, with our second ship, which we just secured in April, not very recently, we're targeting the Kanji Maru, which is the largest whaling factory ship ever built, and it was just launched 2 weeks ago. And Japan has an intention to go after endangered fin whales in the North Pacific and also return to the Southern Ocean once again. And actually, it was quite an achievement with getting this boat. We bought it from the Japanese government. It was a Japanese fisheries patrol vessel. They didn't know they were selling it to us, so they're not too happy about it. But anyway, that means that we have two ships that are ready and prepared to interfere against illegal whaling activities.
Wow. And so Japan, Iceland, and where else are still allowing whaling, the
Uh,
killing?
Norway, Norway and the Danish Faroe Islands. Norway is actually the number one whale killing nation on the planet. Japan is number two. So Norway kills more. They target minke whales. The problem with the Norwegians is that they're all very small boats scattered across the coast, so it's very difficult to interfere with them. Iceland has two whaling ships which we can interfere with, plus they're targeting endangered fin whales. And Japan, of course, has the last pelagic whaling fleet. In the Danish Faroe Islands, this is the driving of pilot whales and dolphins onto the beaches and slaughtering them, which they did just last week. So every one of them has a different level of complexity. So we have to tailor our campaigns, to meet those complexities.
So when you talk about aggressive nonviolence quite frequently in your work, it means that you're going in there and doing what you have to do to save and potentially protect the slaughtering of these sentient beings, but you do it in a way that you're not setting out to harm humans. Is that correct?
Yes, in 1977, I was the expedition leader for the Greenpeace campaign to protect baby harp seals off the coast of Labrador. And at one point, a sealer was about to club a baby seal, and I ran forward and I grabbed the club out of his hand and I threw it into the ocean. And I picked up the seal and took it to safety. I thought that's what I was there for. And I was later called before the board of directors of Greenpeace, and I was accused of theft and violence. You stole that man's property and you destroyed it. I said, yeah, it was a weapon that was being used to illegally kill a seal. So yes, I did that. They said, well, we can't condone that kind of activity. So I said, well, okay. So I set up the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and the foundation of that was aggressive nonviolence. There's nothing wrong with destroying property which is being used to take a sentient life. And if somebody's about to shoot an elephant and you knock that rifle out of their hands and destroy it, to me, that's an act of nonviolence. No non-sentient object should take precedence over the life of a sentient being. So, but we always are very careful to make sure we don't cause any injury to the people who are doing this. And I have never caused a single injury to anyone in the last 50 years of interventions. We're very cautious on that. But we have to also recognize that we live in a society where property is more important than the lives of anything that's alive. I illustrate this sometimes by, I mean, just imagine going into the city of Mecca and spitting on the black stone well, your chances of getting out of that area alive are pretty remote. Or go into Jerusalem and hack away at the Wailing Wall with a pickaxe. You're going to get an Israeli soldier's bullet in the back, and nobody's going to have much sympathy for you. Or go into Rome and attack the Pieta with a hammer. You're going to be in big trouble because you're attacking something which is sacred. But each and every day we go into the most sacred and beautiful cathedrals of the natural world, the rainforests of Amazonia, the Great Barrier Reef off of Australia, and we totally desecrate and destroy all that beauty. And what do we do about it? Nothing. A few protest signs, letters to politicians, but nobody really stands up and really fights for it because this old wall in Jerusalem, this hunk of marble in Rome, this black stone in Mecca means more to us than the rainforests of Amazonia or the Great Barrier Reef or all of those species which are threatened with extinction. That is the basis of what I call anthropocentrism. This idea that we're the only species that matter, that it's all about us. The entire world was created just for us, and everything else is insignificant. And that, I actually set up my own church called the Church of Biocentrism to promote the idea that we have to live in harmony with all of these other species and in accordance with the basic laws of ecology, diversity, interdependence, and recognition of finite growth.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I grew up in the forest in Northern Ontario. So the living world for me is where I belong. And I wonder what happens to children that grow up with devices and inside, walls their whole life. They become detached from the living world. And I think that it's being promoted through all the distractions that we're infusing in our children as important. And I'm even watching, unfortunately, my own grandson become part of the hockey cult. And, it's a cult to me. I hope there's no listeners that are offended by this, but that's what it feels like to me, that we make these people and these people that are playing a sport and doing certain things more important than really exploring a forest or really getting to know what's around them.
There's actually a new definition of wilderness. It's where you don't get the internet. And that. But I wrote an article once called 8 billion monkeys on a spinning ball of mud, basically to describe what we are. And I said, and these monkeys are obsessed with balls, kicking balls, putting them in nets, putting them in little holes in the ground, just everything that involves a ball. We're just totally obsessed with it. I mean, you get a grown man who can't tell you anything about ecology or biology or even astronomy or anything, but they can tell you who hit a no-hitter in 1957 on a baseball game. I mean, this is all useless information, but people are obsessed with it. In fact, I've also noticed that throughout history, you can tell how repressive a society is by the number of pages in the sports section of the newspaper. So, for instance, when South Africa was experiencing apartheid, over half the newspapers were sports, because sports, as the Romans discovered, are circuses to distract people from reality. And as the Romans also said, give people bread and circuses, and you don't have to worry about them thinking or rebelling. And that's pretty much what it is, really. As a Canadian, also, I was raised in the hockey culture. I was forced to play hockey. I was forced to play football. I hated it, but I was forced to do it. And I never really understood what that was all about. Uh, but again, we're indoctrinated into these things, and it takes a great effort of will to rebel against them. So we have to rebel against sports. We have to rebel against religion, and people do think it's really actually a very funny story. I was on an airplane one time from London to Chicago, and we had to go down land in Glasgow because there was a bomb threat on the airplane. And that was fine. We're sitting down there. But I noticed that there were all these cheerleaders that were on the plane. And I said, "Oh, who are you?" And they said, "We're the Lovables." And I said, "What's that?" And we said, "We're the cheerleaders for the Chicago Bulls." So what I said was, "The who?" And they said, "The Chicago Bulls." I said, "I'd never heard of them." And they looked at me totally stunned. "You'd never heard of the Chicago Bulls?" "No, but that's okay. I'm living in Los Angeles." And they said, "Well, they play the Lakers." I said, "Who are they?" And they looked at me like I'm really crazy. Now, what I'm saying is, if you don't know anything about geometry or history or geography or anything, that's fine. But if you don't know who the hell a basketball team is, you're considered an idiot in the cultures that we live in. So really, it's just the perspective is a completely anthropocentric perspective, which is designed to distract us from reality.
Absolutely. And I use that word a lot around distraction versus being present to what's right in front of you. And all the leaves have just opened here. The trees have come back to out of dormancy, and the frogs are all doing their beautiful sounds every morning and every night. And it's quite an opening. It's quite a hard opening. And I remember reading many years ago a book called The Last Child in the Forest, or The Last Child in the Woods. And it really struck me that we may become that world where children don't know what it feels like to be in a forest. And I think that is the disconnect. So as the grandmothers, the solution to that is to really encourage this ability for children to disconnect from their very addictive devices and move out into the world. So I'm sure that that's a very big part of your children's lives.
It's an insidious technology. Just this week, I heard Elon Musk went into a very remote part of the Amazon with Starlink to set up a very remote Amazonian tribe with the internet. He gave them the internet. Not a very good idea, because now they have a serious problem, uh, which is they're all obsessed with porn. I mean, this is a remote tribe in the Amazon, and they're obsessed with Western porn because now they have ability to access it, something they've never seen before, something they've never experienced before, and they've become addicted to it. So technology can be very, very evil on many levels.
Yeah. Speaking of Indigenous people and our First Nations and other Indigenous people around the world, how do you feel? What is your take on their rights as far as their rights to the land and all the sentient beings on their land?
Well, I believe in full rights to the land and also full rights to cultures. Where I draw the line is nobody has a right to kill. You cannot justify the slaughter of another sentient being for any reason. And I have a long history with the indigenous communities. I was a volunteer medic for the American Indian Movement's occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. I learned a lot of lessons from people like Russell Means and Dennis Banks, which proved to be very valuable throughout my life. I'm was brought, adopted into the Longhouse of the Mohawks, Kanawaki Reserve, and they gave us their flag and that. Also being given the support of the Aboriginal communities in Australia and the Maori communities in New Zealand. So I have very close connection with Aboriginal cultures. And I found out there's two things here. There are traditional peoples, the elders and everything, who have one view, and then there are modern people who have a completely different view. They're no different than anybody else really in society. For instance, in 1995, I went into Nia Bay to oppose the killing of gray whales, and I brought in a TV crew with me, two TV crews with me, and we were confronted by a bunch of young macaw in a canoe who were saying they had a right to kill these whales. And I said, are you going to sell this whale meat to the Japanese? Because that's the information I had. And one of them says, when a whale gives himself to me, that's a secret in my heart between my brother, the whale, and me. And I said, I'm going to ask you the question again. Are you going to sell this whale meat to the Japanese? And Spencer McCarthy, who was the spokesperson, he said, when my brother gives himself to me, that's a secret in my heart. And I said, I've got nothing more to you to say, white man. You speak with forked tongue. It was pretty funny, actually, because two elders of the Makah Nation, Dottie Chamblin and Alberta Thompson, came on board. And the reporter said, well, your shaman here was just saying, and she says, shaman? There's no shaman here. Everybody's a Christian here. What are you talking about? And she showed him the video, and he said, oh, that's Spencer McCarthy. He saw Dances with Wolves too many times. She said, part of our culture, for instance, weaving baskets, going into the mountains and picking berries, learning our language. Killing a whale with a 50 caliber rifle, that's not part of our culture. And so she said, no, they reject it. So I went into Nia Bay to oppose the whale hunt with the support of elders of the Makah Nation. And I said all through the time, if they want us to leave, we will leave. But as long as they want us here, we're going to be here. I've been criticized for opposing the killing of bowhead whales up in the Bering Sea. Bowhead whales that are over 200 years of age killed with guns and using modern equipment. This is not a tradition. This is this is a modern killing of these animals. I've been to St. Lawrence Island where this takes place. I was there after documenting illegal whaling off the coast of in Siberia, actually, where it was supposed to be indigenous whaling, but it was actually a factory farm for fur-bearing animals. They were raising sable, fox, and mink and feeding them whale meat, but it was under the guise of Aboriginal whaling. And then when I went to St. Lawrence Island, I saw them shooting walrus with what was M16 or whatever, those AK-47 rifles, and they were shooting walrus just for the ivory, and I saw so many rotting bodies on the beaches and everything. So I've seen up very close and personal these things that are happening, and I criticize them. And I got a lot of support from a lot of indigenous people who agree with me on this. But of course, people are going to attack me for my position on that, because if you criticize anything like that, you're going to be accused of racism or whatever. But I don't fall for that trap, because I've spent my entire life working with indigenous peoples for indigenous rights and also for nature.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate you saying, you're often invited into the community by the Indigenous people and the elders. And it is the motto of the grandmothers, the elders, to protect the grandchildren of all species. It's not just our own, human grandchildren, but the grandchildren of all species. So
One
thank
of
you.
the most one of the people I've admired the most, Alberta Thompson, was an elder of the Makah Nation. She was ostracized and discriminated against like you wouldn't believe for her stand on protecting the whales. She went to the International Whaling Commissions and meetings in Monaco and in Edinburgh and Dublin to speak up for the whales. Her dog was killed. Her grandchildren were bullied. She was the one who invited us to come in and protect the whales in Nia Bay. And she stood up to all of these bullies within the tribe who were demanding that they had the right to go out and kill this whale with a 50 caliber rifle. And she spoke up for it. She was fearless. It was incredible in that. And we prevailed. We stopped that hunt. And we couldn't have done it without her or with Dottie Chamlin or Jesse Itis and other elders of the Makah Nation. And so it's not black and white. There are so many complexities on so many levels on this. I support 100% indigenous traditions, and I support the right for people to have their land rights. For instance, with the Gitsan-Wet'suwet'en Nation in British Columbia, which the Canadian government is trampling on their rights right now. But I will not support traditional hunting if it involves modern equipment, guns and outboard motors and four-wheel, all-terrain vehicles and two-way radios and all these things like that. There's nothing traditional about that. And the animals that they're hunting, which should be protected, in many cases are endangered, have no really have no opportunity to it's simply not fair. It's simply not fair. To me, the killing of a whale or a dolphin is murder. And I cannot condone murder there's no justification for it for any reason, anywhere, by anyone, any place.
So where are the whales and the dolphins in the endangered world right now? Are the majority of them endangered at this point?
Everything in the ocean is endangered, really. But people see that. The thing that alarms me the most, and you can look this up. There's an article in Scientific America in 2010. I'm surprised they haven't updated it. But since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton in the sea. 40% diminishment of all of those aquatic plants which provide 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe and sequester enormous amounts of CO2. And here's the reality. If phytoplankton were to be disappear from the sea, it's already been 40% diminished, but if it were to be disappear from the sea, we die. We don't live on this planet without phytoplankton. It is the foundation of life. Now, why is that phytoplankton being diminished? Because we're diminishing the populations of whales and dolphins and seabirds and fishes. And those species are the farmers in the sea, and their crop is phytoplankton. And because phytoplankton require nutrients like iron, magnesium, and nitrogen, and those are provided in the feces of these animals. And also this thing called the whale pump, where the whales dive to depths and bring up, uh, come to the surface. And when they defecate on the surface, one blue whale, by the way, defecates 3 tons of manure in one day. That floats on the surface, heavily rich in nutrients that are required for by the phytoplankton. It's the law of interdependence. There are three basic laws of ecology. The first is the law of diversity. The strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon the diversity of a species within it. The greater the diversity, the stronger the system. The second is the law of interdependence, that all species within an ecosystem are interdependent with each other. And the third is the law of finite resources. There's a limit to carrying capacity, therefore there's a limit to growth. And when one species steals the carrying capacity of other species, that leads directly to diminishment of diversity and diminishment of interdependence, which leads to ecological collapse. And that's what's happening right now in our oceans. Every single fishery in the ocean is in a state of collapse, and they're not stopping. About 45% of all the fish caught in the ocean are being caught illegally. And most of that fish that's being caught isn't even eaten by people. It's rendered into fish meal, which is then fed to animals on factory farms, to chickens, to pigs, to domestic salmon on salmon farms. Do you know, in our world today, chickens and pigs eat more fish than all the world's seabirds put together? That's how incredible it is. It's a world out of balance, and it's not going to be a world that survives. In 1992, the northern cod population collapsed. They said it would recover. They had a moratorium for 5 years. It didn't. The moratorium is extended to 10 years, then to 20 years, and now it's indefinite. It's not going to recover. It's just one species after another collapsing. And our problem as human beings is that we have this incredible ability to adapt to diminishment. Now, this served us well 20, 30,000 years ago when we had to adapt to diminishment. But now what that means is a species, oh, we wiped out that species, we'll just move on to something else. We'll just adapt to something different. A good example of this, the year 1965. If I were to say to you, you know, in 40 years, you'll be buying your water in plastic bottles and you'll be paying more for that water than the equivalent amount of gasoline, you'll look at me like, you're crazy. Nobody's going to be doing that. And yet here we are. We've adapted to that diminishment. Water in bottles is more valuable than gasoline. You know, I saw a bottle of water in a hotel in New York. They wanted $12 for that liter. That's $48 a gallon. And this is in New York City, which has had the cleanest drinking water of any city in the United States because it comes through stone caverns from the Allegheny Mountains. You can drink the water out of the tap, but no, we've adapted to that diminishment. So now we don't even think of drinking the water out of the tap. We'll buy it in a plastic bottle, which contains nanoplastics, which is going to have serious impact upon our health overall.
Wow, the price of eating flesh and eggs and dairy. Yeah.
Yeah, I just posted a picture the other day of just this lone male chick on a conveyor belt ready to fall into a shredder as people just looked on it without any emotion at all. And we forget that the price of eggs is the extermination of literally tens of millions of baby chicks, which are the males, which are considered useless, and then the females are raised for a couple of years and then discarded, raised in extremely filthy conditions. Factory farms, by the way, are also a major vector for the zoonotic transmission of viruses. That's why every year millions and millions of animals are actually have to be euthanized to stop the spread of those viruses. Everything from chickens to mink are being killed. I mean, they bury pigs alive. They smother ducks and chickens with foam and then just bury them into a landfill. And the reason for that is because these are like giant petri dishes that are causing these viruses to flourish. And if they get out, there's some serious problems. So, they constantly have to be monitored for any outbreaks of that. So right now we're right in the middle. Forget COVID. We now got bird flu, and people are dying from bird flu, and this is going to become more and more of a problem. Zoonotic transmission of viruses. I read a book back in 1995 by Laurie Garrett called The Coming Plague, where she predicted all of this. And she said there will be more and more emerging viruses because what we don't seem to understand what viruses are. We need them. Viruses are absolutely imperative for our survival. There are viruses associated with every plant and every animal. Those viruses keep us healthy. They help manufacture vitamins in our body. They're absolutely essential. But what happens when you reduce the number of species, for instance, where like monkeys, for instance, in Africa, the viruses associated with those species have to go somewhere. And there's 8 billion of us, and we're a pretty attractive host, for viruses that are associated with species which are closely to us, whether that be pigs or monkeys or whatever. Most of our diseases that we take for granted are zoonotic transmitted diseases. We got the common cold from horses, and flu comes from birds, from pigs, from other animals. So, but we've adapted to that because see, the virus, when it is a zoonotic transmission of virus, the virus doesn't want to kill you. I mean, it doesn't have a mind or anything, but it really doesn't want to kill you, but it has to have a state of coexistence. But to develop that coexistence, a lot of the hosts have to die. So, for instance, nobody dies of the bubonic plague anymore because we are all the offspring of the survivors of the bubonic plague. We have resistance, which our ancestors did not have, and the ones that didn't have died. And we're going to find more and more of this is happening. There's always a natural immunity, and those people who have that natural immunity are the ones that survive and then pass on the thing. Now, in addition to the zoonotic transmission of viruses, we're having the emergence of pathogens coming from the melting of permafrost. There's also like worms too, worms and pathogens that have been dormant for 40, 50,000 years and now coming out. In 2017, 1,000 reindeer and one human being died from an anthrax virus that had been unleashed after it had been laying dormant for many, many years. So this is going to become more and more of a problem. But we're all too busy with baseball and hockey to really give much thought to the fact that we're creating this incredibly dangerous world by our lifestyles, which factory farming, for example, is part of.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. I did my master's thesis on plant-based nutrition and the microbiome, and a lot of people don't realize that we're mostly virus, even more than bacteria, and that we need virus. And because people just think of virus as a negative thing, but it really does work symbiotically in our system. It is the raising and the imprisonment and just the horrific conditions and the loss of diversity that's creating viruses that we're not adapted to, that we do not have immunity to, that is destroying us. And I really appreciate what you said about the loss of diversity and the loss of species is creating these conditions for these viruses to become an issue for humans. And so we basically are creating an environment that is not going to allow us to be well unless we stop what we're doing. Because the answers are in our hands. The answers are simple, right? It's that we need to go vegan and everything that belongs to that journey, which means stop all animal agriculture, stop the use of the leather and all the other ways that we use animals and imprison animals for our pleasure and for our perverse pleasure, really, and use.
A lot of people think that we can survive in a world without all these other animals. I was giving a talk at the University of Texas one time, and the guy said, we don't need these animals. We have technology. We have the internet. We have all of these things. We can live in a world without animals. And I looked at him and I said, when I look at you, what do I see? And he says, you see me. I said, are you an individual? He said, yeah, I'm an individual. I said, no, you're not. You're a symbiont. Right now, I'm looking at about 1,700 different species which are in and on you that you wouldn't be able to exist without. Almost all bacteriums and viruses and whatever. But you are a symbiont, a collection of living things. So which are all interdependent with each other. You can't live without them. You need them. And of course, that's very difficult for people to understand because they don't want to hear that for one thing. And but that's the world is a complex situation there, and we just simply want to make it as simple as we can by distracting it. I always try to tell young people this: just look at the planet as a spaceship, which is what it is. We're this incredible spaceship going around the Milky Way galaxy at incredible speeds. And, even at those incredible speeds of 60,000 kilometers an hour, it takes us 250 million years to do one revolution of the Milky Way galaxy. But while on that spaceship Earth, we survive because we have an incredible life support system that provides us with the food we eat and the air we breathe and regulates climate and temperature. And that life support system is run and maintained by a crew of engineers. And those engineers just keep everything running. But we humans, we're not engineers. We're passengers. We're having a wonderful time, amusing ourselves, entertaining ourselves. But what we are doing is we're killing engineers. We're murdering the engineers on spaceship Earth. Every day we're wiping them out. And there's only so many engineers you can destroy before the machinery begins to fall apart. The insects and the flowers and the bees and the trees and the whales and the worms. I mean, they're keeping everything going. They're the engineers on spaceship Earth. And we don't live on this planet without them. We have to live in harmony with them if we're going to survive. A world without bees is a world that's going to have some serious, serious problems in producing agriculture on that. A world without worms, again, the same problem. And yet we seem to forget that it's disappearing. Again, this adaptation to diminishment. If anybody lived in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they can recall going down the road in their car and you had to stop every once in a while at the gas station and wipe off all the dead insects off of your windshields. That doesn't happen anymore. Maybe one or two here, but it certainly wasn't like it was in the 60s, 70s, and even the early 80s. I mean, we have seen a major reduction in insect populations on this planet, and that is not good news. We need them. People say, well, we don't have to live in a world without mosquitoes. Yes, we do. We need mosquitoes. I mean, first of all, they feed a vast number of birds and bats and other things like that. They're sort of the foundation, the foundation of that particular food pyramid and everything. And how many mosquitoes actually spread malaria? It's actually a small percentage of them. It's not your average one like that, but they have a place, a niche within the ecosystem. Everything does. There is no useless species within an ecosystem, or otherwise nature would have removed that species eons ago. And everything is here by virtue of the fact that it is contributing to that interdependence of life.
Well, we're certainly grateful that you're our symbiont of our waters and the protection of our whales, especially, but all living life in our oceans. Thank you for that. So where are you heading from here? You said that you will be in Iceland if necessary in the near future.
On
And hope
Tuesday, the
on
minister issues the permits, and I'll be heading to Iceland next week. So we're just standing by to wait and see what happens. It's 50-50 right now. Christian Lofson, who's the one who wants to kill the whales, is the most politically influential and wealthiest man in Iceland. Usually gets what he wants, and he wants those permits. And the fact that here it is almost on within 2 weeks of the so-called whaling season, and he hasn't gotten the permits yet, but they haven't said they're not going to give it to him, and they haven't said they're going to give it to him. Finally, 2 days ago, the minister said she's going to make that announcement on Tuesday. So we don't know which way it's going to be because she knows that if she does not give him the permits, that he can take her job away from her. He's already taken the last minister out, and he can do it again because he has enormous influence within the politics of Iceland. The majority of Icelanders are against whaling. The majority of the people in the government are against whaling. But again, it all comes down to the incredible power of one individual. Like in anywhere in our society, it's corporations and individuals. I mean, the entire West Coast fishing operation in Canada is controlled by one man, Jimmy Pattison, who started off as a used car salesman and now totally controls the fishing industry. And what Jimmy Pattison wants from the government of Canada, Jimmy Pattison usually gets, because that's really who's running things in our world today, are those corporate powers and rich individuals.
Yeah, I just did a podcast with Dr. Will Tuttle, and he was talking about the 8,000 people that run the world. And it's a very small percentage when you think of 8 billion. Yeah. So
Unfortunately, most of them just don't care. But there are a few. There are a few who are doing what they can. But for the most part, the people are obsessed with. I don't know what they're obsessed with, but it certainly isn't like having a better world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing your part. And can you just end by sharing a little bit about your crew and the people that work with you? And are a lot of them volunteers?
Yeah.
And just share a little bit about that. Give a big shout out to all those people that spend time
Well,
working.
over the last 2 years, I've had to rebuild my organization because there was a hostile takeover, took everything away from me, the ships, the assets, and everything. So, but we've built it up, and we've now got 2 ships, and a lot of the veterans, a lot of the people who work with me for many years are still with me. And these are volunteers from all over the world. I think I've got about 400 crew applications right now. I think the hard part really is telling people, well, we don't have room for you right now, but we're going to try and do it. But so we don't have any problem getting people. That's not the issue. It's always problem raising the money to run the ships and everything. It used to be easy, but that was all taken away from us. But then again, there's an advantage to having returning to the grassroots and fighting again and building it all up and everything. It leads to more motivation, more inspiration, and the will to get these things done. We should never get too comfortable or too complacent with our position on this, and never take things for granted. And
So people can reach out to the Captain Paul Watson Foundation and support what you're doing.
yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Paul.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Today is World Oceans Day. I'm not a big fan. I was there in Rio de Janeiro at the UN Conference on the Environment in 1992 when Canada introduced this idea for a World Oceans Day. That was the same conference where Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, introduced sustainability, which of course has become just a marketing term for business as usual. But I find it really ironic that Canada would introduce World Ocean Day, considering Canada's horrendous record when it comes to marine ecology. Not only did Canada decimate its fish populations on both coasts, the West Coast, the East Coast. The history of the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans incompetence is so bad that the Canadian government actually destroyed all of the files and the libraries. There is no record of what Canada has done over the last 60 years. I was actually invited to speak to the United Nations in 2015 at World Ocean Day in New York. And that's the last time I spoke at that event, because after my talk, I was notified that I will never be welcome back in the United Nations again to speak on World Oceans Day. Why? Because World Oceans Day is sponsored by the Nippon Foundation. And I said too many things about Japanese whaling and Japanese overfishing, and that got the Japanese government quite upset, and therefore got the Nippon Foundation upset. So it's really strange that the World Ocean Day at the United Nations is being sponsored by a country which is actively involved with overfishing, killing whales, and so much destruction in the ocean, including the incredible damage caused by Fukushima. We don't need a World Oceans Day. What we need is to understand that each and every day we have a responsibility to do everything we can to protect diversity and interdependence in the sea. Because if the ocean dies, we die. And the ocean is dying. Since 1950, we've lost over 40% of the phytoplankton in the sea. And phytoplankton provides up to 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe and sequesters enormous amounts of CO2. If phytoplankton disappears from the sea, we do not survive. It's as simple as that. This is really the ocean planet. It's water in continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea, sometimes it's in the clouds, sometimes locked in ice, sometimes underground, and sometimes it's in the cells of every plant and animal on the planet. We are the ocean, and we must do everything we can to protect diversity and interdependence so that the ocean can survive. Because if the ocean does not survive, we die.